Was Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures all that fabulous? I'm not necessarily here to really debate that today, but what I do want to say about Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures is that overall, for me, personally for me, it is a very meh movie in the High School Musical universe. Now, I want to speak about today Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures, how her movie could have been better, okay? Because it is the Sharpay Evans, diva of the High School Musical universe, okay? A beloved character we know and love. We are going to judge her. I am going to judge her in High School Musical because of her actions, but she is someone, despite her actions, that we are just like diva. Diva, we want to see more from her, okay? That's why she got the spinoff. But when I think about Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures, it is very a meh movie to me personally, okay? And there could be a lot of factors to that. High School Musical 3 aired in 2008. Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures aired in 2011. Okay? So we have to take into consideration this time span in between 2008 to 2011 because I was probably 11 years old when High School Musical started, okay? So we really, or maybe 12, I don't know. This was like 2006, mind you. So we really grew up with the series, right? So by the time Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures came out, personally, I was still watching Disney. Yes, I was. Okay. I was listening to Radio Disney until they turned that off in my area. You know what I mean? So I can't say that I am the norm by any means. But in 2011, I was 16 years old. Okay. I was still watching Disney personally. Like I said, I was still watching, I was still tuned in. But I was 16. So, like, things have changed in a way, right? And I also think it's really hard to encapsulate the era. I don't even know if the era is the right way to say it, but like just the kind of content that we watched. And I think many reasons, and we'll get into Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures so you can get a reminder of what the plot is before we go into the depth of it, right? But I think when it comes down to the kind of character Sharpay really shined as, and it's particularly in her debut in 2006 versus now, I think there was a shift in media where we weren't getting as many movies or TV shows with this type of character in it. So maybe I can't say that's why we didn't get an interesting Sharpay storyline. I don't, have the timeline of how long have they had this particular storyline in the works. How long it took them for get it filmed. Obviously at this point Ashley Tisdale was aging out of the Disney era, so it's not even to say that they really could have continued with Sharpay too much more, especially in this time. And that is just because like people get older and age up and the things that people like become different, right? And the shift from 2006 to 2011 is obviously going to be big. For me, Sharpay was kind of this like very rich girl character who obviously did not see the issues in her ways, and she did act out in many ways in High School Musical. I always say this about Sharpay. Sharpay was diva. We love her though. We love her though. But she is diva and she is in the wrong in the High School Musical movies, right? And I talk about this a lot, so you can look at my other pieces of content if you want to know more in depth about that. But Sharpay in you know, the High School Musical zone was really saying, "Hey, I don't want you to challenge my place." And you are challenging that to both Troy and Gabriella. So she really was like, "How am I going to sabotage these people so that I can keep my place in power?" And that is a story of the status quo, breaking free of the status quo, and understanding the powers at play when we speak about the ideas of the status quo and what keeps people to maintaining the status quo. How do you break free of it? What are the power plays happening within it? And Sharpay is really guilty of those things in all three High School Musical movies, some more than the rest. High School Musical 2, High School Musical 1, and then High School Musical 3 being her least. Just because that was just like an overall movie where she was still acting her same way, but just plot wise, she wasn't really quite used as a huge plot device in that last movie. But we can't even get into that today. If you're watching on YouTube, I have my mic on Mingy from ATs, so just wanted to clear that up there in case anyone was like, "Who is this random man?" First, before we get into what Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures could have been and how Sharpay's spinoff could have been 10 million times more interesting, let's get into Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures. Now, for those who don't remember, Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures follow Sharpay after college, okay? And first things first, we need to recognize is that in the opening scene, she is performing for a charity event for her parents, okay? They are throwing on a charity event. She obviously is going to be the performer. Great. We expect that of Sharpay. That makes sense. We get to a conversation with Sharpay and her father. Now, let's wind it back for a second. Where we leave Sharpay in High School Musical 3. She is going to go of U of A, right, for the theater department, right? But she also said she is going to help out Miss Darvis in the new school year, right? Now, interestingly enough, okay, that's where we leave her. 2008, that's where we leave her, right? Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures picks up almost a year after she has graduated high school. And her dad's like, you got to figure out what you're going to do, okay? Because you basically took a gap year. You didn't go to school. You didn't do anything. So you got to figure out what you're going to do. Otherwise, you'll be working at Lava Springs, okay? Their country club from High School Musical 2, in case you have forgotten. Now, let's stop right there. First issue here. Does Sharpay Evans, someone we have coined in all three High School Musical movies, to do whatever it takes to be on top, right? You want to be on top? Sorry, I just like thought of America's Next Top Model. Okay, back to what we were saying. She was always causing the issues because she wanted to be on top. She didn't want anyone to challenge her. She wanted to be the center of attention always, okay? In every single movie we see this. And she is determined, okay? Not in the right way. She's doing a lot of wrong things to try to maintain that, but she's determined nonetheless. We know this. We have clocked this about Sharpay, okay? In the best and worst ways, okay? So do you believe that Sharpay Evans would have taken a gap year? To me, that does not seem like the Sharpay Evans we know, right? Because it would be different. Like, to me, she seems like if she was not going to go to school, okay, if she was not going to get a job, not going to go to school, wouldn't she be trying to make her own way? And yes, she's performing at her parents', charity event or whatever. But we knew she was doing this because she was doing this at Lava Springs as well for the talent show. It seems to me like she would have like paved her own way at the very least, or made her own thing that she like would have gotten people to go to, as far as theater goes. So just tell me that Sharpay Evans was not really doing anything. Like, I'm sorry. There is not a world in which I believe that. Right? Because Sharpay Evans, Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures, you really see her kind of realize she kind of gets humbled a bit, right? Because she holds this power in East High that is just kind of like this joke, like, once you leave high school, who's gonna give a fuck about you, right? They don't know. You don't hold this power of you are the Sharpay Evans, right? No one's afraid of you. No one even knows who you are, right? So obviously, when you leave high school, there's that, right? But it's just like, I'm sorry, like she wasn't doing anything. Like, you know what I mean? I just do not believe that she was sitting there. I would have thought like maybe she was writing her one woman show or something, like at the very least. Like, none of this is happening. Not even trying to be a production of anything. We didn't hear nothing about her going to Miss Darbus at the very least. Like, you would have thought she maybe even would have at least done that, even if she didn't want to stick with it, right? Like, that is not the Sharpay Evans that you have laid the groundwork for, first and foremost. Okay. Nevertheless, at this charity event, they now here's the thing you need to know. Her dog, Boy, was also there with her, and a casting agent talks to her, right? And she is getting the impression like, oh my gosh, like you want me to be on Broadway, right? So this casting agent reaches out to her and she's like, great, I'm going to go to the city and I'm going to audition. Gets the audition, realizes it is not for her, it is for her dog, Boy. Okay, not really how she wanted to go about things, but you know what? She's going to figure it out. Maybe in making her dog famous, she can then be famous herself. Okay, and she's going to do anything to make sure Boy gets this part in this Broadway musical. Right. We get this here. She has little rivals with Gabe Duncan. I'm forgetting his name in the movie, and it's not really relevant here. And he also has a dog who also wants to be the star of the movie. Okay, so we get a little where they're sabotaging each other, playfulness there as well. Amber Lee is an actress who happens to be someone that Sharpay really regards in the theater, right? Like, how cool that she even gets to work in the same realm as Amber Lee, right? And eventually, Amber Lee has a diva moment, right? And fires her assistant, and Sharpay goes, I'll help you out, right? And she in turn kind of learns kind of Amber Lee's kind of vibe, right? Amber Lee is essentially what supposed to be like the Sharpay Evans, right? It's supposed to be a mirror to Sharpay, right? And the thing about Amber Lee is she is such a diva, okay, in the way Sharpay is, but even in a more insane way, right? Because here's the thing. Amber Lee, star of the show, the animal, the doggy, okay, is the sidekick, but also like part of the show, right? They have the whole thing going on there. She is threatened by the dogs, okay? She is cornering the dogs. The dogs are alone. The dogs are dogs, mind you. They're just, hey, tell me where to hit my mark. Give me the tree and I'll do it, okay? She is going to the dogs and she is like, you little rascals. I'm making this up, by the way. This is not verbatim what she says. Like, I am the star. If you think you're the star, you're wrong. I am the star of the show. They're dogs. They're dogs, mind you. So you're like, okay, girl, you crazy, you crazy. She does not like these dogs, and Gabe Duncan and Sharpay have learned this well, okay? Eventually, they kind of mend their little rivalry they have going on, and they're like, listen, we're cool. Like, at the end of the day, like, I hope you and your dog do well, and obviously be cool if we get this part, but like, this woman is actually crazy, and like, we need to expose her for the crazy person she is, because she's like literally like, you are stealing the show away to a dog, okay? And obviously this is a very exaggerated version of this, right? But yes, okay, so we're getting Sharpay's storyline where, eventually she wants to team up with Gabe Duncan to help figure out a way to expose this actress who, at the end of the day, is just like a mean Sharpay. Is supposed to be. I wouldn't say that it was quite, how do I say, handled, done the right way, where like you exactly see that is the reflection of Sharpay, right? Like, you get what they're saying, but it's just like, did they do the greatest job of portraying that? Not so much. And I am leaving some stuff out that we are going to come back to when I talk about what we could have done better for Sharpay. So mind you, if you've seen Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures, you're like, we're missing some details. That's okay. Trust me, we will get back to that. So what Sharpay does is she ends up turning Amber Lee's mic on when she's giving her a hug. That way, when Amber Lee is behind curtain before she's supposed to perform, the audience hears, sorry, Amber complaining about the dogs. And they're like, wow, what the hell, right? And then eventually the show was going to be canceled. Austin Butler, which, once again, important, honestly, important thing I did not mention. Austin Butler, loved your work in Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures, was in this movie, okay? And Austin Butler, we'll get into that, but his character basically shows the producers who were saying, like, listen, like, we lost our leading lady, no one else is going to know the show in time, like, eventually we're just going to have to shut it down, right? And he shows them a video of Sharpay doing a number from the show, and they're like, great, Sharpay's going to take over. Sharpay then gets her Broadway moment with her doggy. Okay, so boom, there we go. Sharpay on Broadway. You knew that was going to happen. That obviously it was kind of giving Rachel from Glee kind of vibes. Like, we knew she was going to be on Broadway. However way it was going to happen, it was going to happen. Okay, that made sense for Sharpay. That was one thing that made sense, that she was going to be on Broadway. Now, let's get into my complaints about the rest of Sharpay's storyline that I have not voiced yet, and also then into what would have made a Sharpay sequel 10 times more better, okay? When we are talking about the Sharpay Evans, okay? Because we know when it comes to sequels, it's really hit or miss. It's really hit or miss, and sequels tend to be not that great. Really, when do you hear people talk about sequels, right? It may be accepted because you like the universe, that has been created here, but they tend sequels, spin-offs, they tend to not do as well as the original. So back to Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures. Number one, my biggest complaint here is that we do not see the story carried out in a way that makes sense for the lesson. Hopefully that made sense when I said that, because it didn't to me. When I am thinking about the lessons of High School Musical, and I'm not here to debate whether they really were here to write this story to enforce the lessons of High School Musical, right? Or just to be a fun little spin-off for Sharpay, either way. But what I have done in really looking into the High School Musical plot is looking at a story of the status quo. How do we uphold the status quo? What are the many ways that we have upheld ourselves and placed others to the status quo? And when we look at the different ways that people do that, Sharpay Evans is someone who holds a position of power, right? And she is going to wield that and try to sabotage people to maintain her spot, right? She really wants control at the end of the day, and she feels that other people getting that opportunity is a threat to her, right? Even though she knows she can do it, right? Where, for example, in the first movie, it's like, okay, like at the end of the day, if you were that confident in your spot and in your talent, then you wouldn't be worried that there was one person who, when you've never been challenged in your 17 years of musical career, right? Like you wouldn't be worried that Troy and Gabriella were going to outshine you if that was really the issue, right? Like there are many intersecting things to that that we couldn't possibly get into today. But like I said, you can watch previous videos or episodes of me speaking about this if you want a more in depth analysis of that. So, when I'm thinking throughout the movies, and I want to do a whole Sharpay's storyline analysis about, in particularly, the status quo with her storyline, because I do believe, you know, at every movie, right, we see Sharpay do this shit. They learn the lesson. We're all in this together. Um, they solve the issue at the end of the day, and Sharpay at the end of the day is welcomed back into the group, right? And she doesn't really face any consequences. Not that I'm saying, because stop and think, what do you think a consequence actually means? Which I said we can't get into the depths of that right now. Another time, trust me, I will. But like she doesn't really learn her lesson, right? Like she does this shit, causes issues, and then comes back and is like, "Ugh, okay, I guess." And then guess what? Next movie does the same shit, right? In some way, shape, or form. As I mentioned before, High School Musical 3, because there's less of a big, huge plot line in High School Musical 3, because it is a wrap up movie, we still see these things play out, just not in the large ways that we did in the first two movies. To me, when I'm thinking about, okay, if we are going to continue Sharpay's plot, right? And how do we get Sharpay to learn her lesson in some way, shape, or form, right? Because we, as I previously stated, when we think about this era, 2006, when Sharpay first came on the scene for High School Musical, right? She is giving rich girl who like does not see her privilege in anything and is always causing issues and is diva, right? This is not the first time that we see something like that. When we think of reality TV, we are thinking of Paris Hilton. When we are thinking of other movies, we are thinking Cowbells. We are thinking Material Girls. Okay. And whilst it was 2011, and I think time was aging out of that kind of era of TV that existed when Sharpay first debuted, like I think a Cowbells Material Girls storyline would 100% suit Sharpay. Because something, and when I say Sharpay didn't learn her lesson, is that, like I said, she was just welcomed in at at the end of every movie, and it's not to say that she should have been like punished by any means. It's just that like we don't see a storyline of her like really coming to terms with like the real issues, right? And this is something that we see if you haven't seen Cowbells or Material Girls, right? It is they're both movies, which is funny. Allie and AJ, and then Hillary and Haley Duff, um, for the Material Girls, and it is basically movie sisters who end up, you know what, they both start, it's kind of like the same movie, which I looked up, and they were actually like came out around the same time, so it's not like one really copied the other. I think it was just something of its time, the type of movie that was popular in the time it came out. And two sisters, they set a fire, they're really privileged, they have to, you know, at the end of the day, really get down to work and learn a lesson. So I mentioned Cowbells and Material Girls here is because we are seeing a story about girls who are very privileged, and they are in a Sharpay kind of Evans privilege, right? And they have to, something has to happen to develop their plot to put them in a position where they are not as privileged as they used to be, and they have to kind of learn that the hard way, I guess. And I don't believe that you should have to go through these things to have to learn those lessons. It's just so often, especially when we talk about these movies, is like sometimes until it affects you, people aren't going to learn. And I don't love that, but like that is kind of the theme of these movies. And unfortunately, the theme of what many people are realizing here in America today. But that's neither here nor there for this moment. So, one thing I note about Sharpay is when she makes the big move to the city. Okay. And what I forgot to mention is earlier when I was saying how her dad's like, you got to figure out what you're going to do. Otherwise, you're coming back to work at Lava Springs. Her dad gives her a month, right? And obviously, she gets to New York City. She realizes they're not looking for her, Sharpay. They're looking for her dog, right? So, like, the plans are kind of getting foiled, right? And the thing about Sharpay is she did not plan accordingly, right? So she gets to this penthouse, which she originally was going to live in, right? A fancy penthouse. And they say, sorry, no pets. So she gets kicked out on the streets. Where does Austin Butler, Oscar award winning, has he won an Oscar? I don't know. for his time in Sharpay's Fabulous Adventure actor come in. He comes in that he plays like one of Sharpay's friend's mom's son is Austin Butler, okay? And are we going to be using the real name of his character in the movie? No, because why would we call him anything other than Austin Butler in this moment? So Austin Butler sees her sitting outside with all her, luggage, because obviously she brought a shit ton, everything but the kitchen sink, with her to the city, and goes, "Listen, okay, maybe I can get you in at my apartment place," right? And she gets a junky studio apartment, and he helps her transform that to pinkify it to make it Sharpay. But one thing I always say about Sharpay, yes, she has to get the studio apartment, so she's kind of living, uh, you know, I say in a fake way, the city life as an average person, but she is not really like she didn't lose her money in that way, right? Like obviously she fucked up the opportunity and she didn't want to tell her dad that. So like this was the best way that she could go about it. But like she wasn't really getting to live like a poor person in New York City. Like she was not getting this like struggling working artist kind of vibe. That maybe honestly, I think she should have had to go through, to be honest. Right? So she's kind of cosplaying in a sense, uh, this thing, right? Like obviously she gets to the theater, she's not they're like, who the fuck are you? Like, you have no power here. Like, so she really does have to try to get her spot on Broadway in a sense, right? But like she doesn't really have to struggle. And the way that we see this kind of idea that we see this artist, right? Like she has been given this opportunity, obviously high school theater and high school musical, right? For so long. So now like, oh, sorry, like I have no power here. I have to work for it. Even though she didn't really have to do much. It was just like situational. So when we get to the bit about Amber Lee, right? Amber Lee was supposed to be a reflection of Sharpay. So eventually, when Sharpay ends up exposing Amber Lee, right? They have this talk where they're like, if anyone said I was just like you, like honestly, I would be offended because of the way this woman has acted, right? And that's the thing about Sharpay. Like, if she saw a reflection of her nastiness, would she still want to act that way? And that was what that scene was supposed to be. The issues that I take with the plot are we did not see Amber Lee. Yes, she was giving Sharpay Evans attitude 100%, but like we didn't see that effect on Sharpay, right? We knew that Sharpay and Gabe Duncan were fighting over who got to have their dog, right? Because they were competing for their dog to have the spot, right? So they were having their little kerfuffle there until they call it good. You know what I mean? But the difference would have been if Amber Lee was acting in horrible ways to Sharpay or even trying to sabotage Sharpay. Maybe I don't know, like her dog bit her and then she said like I'm going to try to figure it. Like we didn't really see a plot line to the degree of a Sharpay Evans sabotage plot line to really mimic to Sharpay what she has done to Troy and Gabriella at East High, right? We were not seeing that in some capacity. And not that we had to duplicate the plot exactly to High School Musical to really reflect that to her, but I'm just saying, like, we didn't see this really, like, we just saw, like, how she was acting and, like, ooh, like, right? Like, we didn't really get a big turn of events. And I think that contributes to why Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures, like, is very meh, right? Like, plotline wise, it could have been so much cooler, especially when we're talking about Sharpay. Like, basis idea, okay, but like we could have workshopped this. And did we have time to workshop this more? Because, like I said, 2008, 2011, like, come on, guys, I'm sure we could have done better. So, my overall point, I guess, to be a little more precise, is that when we look at how does someone learn a lesson, it's kind of a tough situation because I think there's a lot of talk like, do how much do you have to lose to really recognize that you need to make a change, and how do we view consequences, is a great thing to think about because I do think they are intertwined. And I am not saying that Sharpay has to suffer to learn her lesson, but like we gotta give you some character development in that way. And I think so often, or at least especially in movies, unfortunately it doesn't happen till like you really feel the hit of the situation. And the best example is in High School Musical 2, right? Because Troy, he is taking all these privileges from Sharpay, despite the fact he doesn't want to get with Sharpay in any way. And he is technically taking advantage of Sharpay and also thinks that he's doing it for his future, right? And is also going about it the wrong way, which is part of that. he also is abandoning Gabriella by not showing up to their dates that he also has planned and said that he was going to be there, not showing up to meet with his friends when he says he is. And all just like, hey, you accept that I got to do my own thing because I'm going to get my own future out of this little thing that Sharpay and I have going here, and we'll get back to it whenever. Like, yeah, like I know that I showed up late and I said I was going to be there and I wasn't, but like this, it's for my future, right? Like he thinks he's doing it, that he's in the right, right? And he has to lose that, right? Gabriella has to say, gotta go my own way. Chad has to say, sorry, like, you are not who I thought you were anymore. Which I know feels ironic because, like, Chad does go back and forth through, like, accepting him and not accepting him within the means of the status quo. So it feels, like I said, High School Musical 2 is, like, the plot is a little iffy with, like, how flippy floppy the characters are to, like, fully understand, like, just how bad Troy was being in here. So it's like I can understand if some people fail to see why Troy was in the wrong because they didn't quite play it out the greatest way. Happens in High School Musical. Sometimes we don't have time or haven't elaborated on the plots enough to do a full understanding of this. But Troy losing, right, his friends and his girlfriend really made him sit and think, where he was talking with his dad and he's like, have I changed? Right? What have I done? Like, what, there has to be something to, I don't know, to have this reflection. So, like, if you are someone who is very privileged in the way they do things or just in the way that they go about life, right? Whether that is you actually have like big privileges like Sharpay, or you're someone who just has like general privileges, right? That like unless you have this ability to sit and reflect on your actions, are you actually going to ever solve an issue someone brings up to you? And so these are, I want to get into my ideas on how maybe we could have bettered the plot for Sharpay to bring her to a spot where she has to really realize these things, right? Because, as I've stated, in Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures, yes, like she does look at Amberly and say, that's not right. And she says, I wouldn't want anyone to think that I was like you, right? Where she goes, like, she sees kind of like a mirror to her, right? But like, we didn't see Sharpay be placed in that. And we didn't, and the reason I say, like, it didn't feel like we got that Sharpay learned her lesson is because, like I said, it's not that she has to suffer by any means. It's just that, like, how you got there, I don't know. Like, I don't feel like the way Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures plot went really would have made her realize that she was like fully in the wrong. Like, because also, and this is not to say Sharpay did it for this reasons at all, but right, like she couldn't have possibly known that, that if Amber Lee got out of the play that she was going to be able to get a chance to be the lead by any means. Like, there was no way for her to predict that. But like, it is, you know what I mean? Like, it's tough to say. Like, she was just ready to take the L at the end of the day and be like, okay, I guess I got to go back home if this Broadway thing doesn't work out. But it's just like, I don't know, like the sacrifice of not being in the play and having to go back home, like, to me wasn't enough for her to really like sit and reflect, because I actually think that's a problem when we don't see the reflection part. Because in the first High School Musical, when Troy's friends, Gabriella's friends are bullying them back into the status quo, we actually don't see a reflection moment from them. The only bit that we see in High School Musical is that Chad and Taylor realize that Troy and Gabriella like are kind of acting differently towards them, like kind of just in glances, right? And then they go, "Oh shit, we were wrong," and then they go apologize, right? So we miss that in between. We miss that reflection part that we weren't seeing for them to really come to that, right? Because I think a lot of the things, even in real life, right? If you are to accept you have been an XYZ person towards someone or have done something in the wrong, what do you also have to accept? If you have to accept how you've acted like a brat, like, are you going to make amends with the people from East High? You know what I mean? Like, you reflect on past experiences, how you have also done that once you like acknowledge like how you have acted that way, right? Let's get into my ideas for Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures if it was more interesting. Sharpay has to work at Lava Springs. Now, like I was saying, a cowbells, material girls moment, right? Where these privileged girls have to eventually get their hands dirty and actually get to work, right? And this is, to me, is not a big sacrifice, right? For example, I rewatched both Cowbells and Material Girls. I feel like Cowbells is a little bit of a better example of this, although they're like similar movies. Is that they had to go work at the dairy farm, right? And they got to be there and not just do the work hands on, right? But be with the people, with the community of people to understand their struggle. And one sister was really getting that, right? And the other sister was still in a privileged mindset. She was just like, I'm doing this because I have to. I don't want to be here. Like, I don't care about what's happening to the workers because, like, this doesn't have to do with me, right? Like, I'm just here because dad is sending me here. And the other one really was building solidarity with the workers and wanted to help solve their problem. So we could have gone this route with Lava Springs because, as you know, Lava Springs owned by her parents. So hear me out. We can go with the dad was like, "Hey, you really got to get down to what you were doing." Maybe he just says you got to go work outright, or maybe something fails within Sharpay's plan and she just has to go to Lava Springs. Nevertheless, we set the scene. She is working alongside the people of Lava Springs. Maybe she is even realized, maybe she helps them form a union. Maybe she's realizing something's funky here because we know, especially, and this would be interesting because we saw the way Sharpay kind of ruled things at Lava Springs in High School Musical 2. Like, she has to be the one that's realizing that some shit is going down. Or maybe there's just a boss in there that does not care that, she is the owner's daughter and is going to, I don't know, do something. Or maybe we see her be privileged in that, like she tries to rule the thing and tries to maybe threaten to get people fired, even though she's working within the system. Like there's something there with whichever way you want to go about it, where she is working at Lava Springs. Or maybe this is what I also wrote down. Something happened to a beloved team member of the staff, and they helped to put a show on to fundraise for them. This could also, because we're talking about Sharpay, how do we give her, how do we teach her the lesson, but also still involve like what Sharpay likes, right? And we know that Sharpay has done the talent show and loves doing it, but she could use her talent for a good cause, right? So these are some ideas within Lava Springs. My next idea, Sharpay works with Miss Darbus in the theater department. Maybe there's another person who also works with her and they're butting heads. They could be looking at big donors for the musical, and maybe they only want to put the best of the best. And what we learn in High School Musical is that you can try something new at any point of your life, even if you're not the best of the best. Obviously, Troy could sing, and obviously, I think we agreed, like Ryan and Sharpay, like, and it's just a privilege to have being able to know what you want to do and have that experience, to back you up. But like Troy wasn't as trained, right? So maybe, in a part they didn't want him to get the part because their argument was he wasn't as trained. But it's High School Musical, anyone can join. And in trying to make the best of the best musical for these donors that they wanted to keep the musical department going, because maybe there was going to be cuts to East High, they exclude people, and maybe there's a lesson there to be learned. Or maybe we make this more interesting. Maybe we make this like a Nancy Drew kind of Sharpay thing, right? In that the arts are being cut for a mysterious reason, and they have to work together to figure out what was that reason, or was there somebody who was doing that shit. And we can learn a lesson or two about community working together, how we allocate these funds, how they're used. Like, there's something there. There's something there that we could do for sure. Now we have the big dramatic one, which I don't think Disney would ever do, but I think this is interesting in the realm of like a general movie. Maybe Sharpay gets cut off for a period of time, and she really has to figure that shit out. So maybe she gets to New York City, gets in trouble, calls her dad for help, and we know in the beginning of Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures, like the reason why Sharpay didn't want to tell her dad, like, oh, I fucked up the penthouse situation, was because like he was gonna be like, okay, now you really got to come back home, right? Like she was in fear of that. Um, he ends up cutting her off to quote unquote teach her a lesson, which, like I said, doesn't necessarily need to happen. She doesn't need to get it to that degree, but it is just like there are some people who don't learn without something like that. So maybe she just has to live in New York. As I said, I felt like she was kind of cosplaying like this typical person that would live in New York, right? Like where you're working a couple jobs. You're working a barista job and you're also constantly auditioning. Maybe you're trying to do local theater before you get up to the big Broadway spots, like something of that nature. And maybe she keeps running into the same person every time and they have like a nemesis relationship, because I do think Sharpay does thrive off of like this nemesis situation, whether, like I said, she's making up in her mind or there genuinely is one. Um, but maybe like we learn something about this other person that kind of like unites them, and she starts to feel bad for them and they learn why they're butting heads after all. Um, you know, at the end of the day, it's one of those things like we're butting heads, but we're gonna come to realize what the real situation is, and maybe she needs to learn that, right? I know, very vague, but like this kind of idea, like maybe we're seeing this like tension between them because Sharpay like was so very clearly privileged at some point in her life, right? And maybe this person is not coming from a privileged background. Next up, Sharpay on Broadway. We know Sharpay was obviously going to be on the stage some way or how, okay? Now, I don't believe she took a gap year, okay? But maybe, and this is something this would have been more interesting to do, she somehow creates a workshop for kids, right? Because my biggest gripe with Sharpay is that if now we know there's a lot of things going on when we really dissect Sharpay, and the idea of the status quo in the story we are telling in High School Musical. So that noting from that perspective, it wasn't just about the fact that Troy wasn't trained enough, didn't have enough experience, right? Because we're talking about high school musical, high school to be a place where you can explore something at any time in your life and you don't have to be the best at it. Okay? You don't have to be productive. You don't have to be the best of the best. You don't have to be seeking a future in the activities that you do, especially in high school, right? Something that the status quo sometimes prevents people from realizing. So maybe she is helping teach some sort of helpful kids program, or whether it be like a bunch of people are buying into this program, maybe a bunch of rich kids, and there happens to be like one kid who like won to be in the program or something, and she stumbles upon a big talent, but the kid cannot afford to keep going to these classes and she really wants to help. She says like, listen, like, you are such a talent and I think you could really be a star someday. And she wants like, hey, take all these classes, do this, but they don't have the money to do that. How is she gonna realize like, oh, like, right, she's realizing her privilege that she had to explore those ideas when she was younger in the way that other kids don't. Surely there could be something there with an underprivileged kid idea. Maybe she was just a part of a special program that was going to be shut down, right? We are taking these programs away from children that they should be able to access to express those things no matter what kind of money they have. That's a great idea. So you can see from the theme of all of my ideas here is that there is something where she is either put in a situation where she has to realize like, oh, like it is actually hard. I am seeing other people struggle, whether she is also briefly in that struggle with them, or she is just like put in a situation where she sees somebody else struggle and somehow realizes her privilege in that. Like, obviously that's kind of like sort of the same thing that I just said, but like different from briefly experiencing that versus like witnessing it and then being like, oh wait, this isn't right, why do I have this privilege and other people don't? So there are, I think, a ton of ways this could have been done a little bit better. I like I said, I don't know the logistics of how movies are made, how long someone was writing this Sharpay script. How would you make an hour and a half movie out of any of these ideas? That's beyond me. It's not here to criticize the writers of Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures by any means, but it is just like, I think we could have, like I said, if our intention was to kind of carry on this plot of High School Musical, but also making it Sharpay, could have been so interesting. Nonetheless, a real interesting idea for Sharpay. Now, like I said, as we were growing up with Sharpay, right? By 2011, I was 16. What if we grew this up? And we know Disney, not a fan of aging up people and it not being Disney friendly. The problem with Lizzie McGuire, right? But I think, if Sharpay had like even just one season of a show, an ABC Family teen drama, now that would have been juicy, right? Put her in the city, put her in so we have more episodes to kind of go over maybe her continually learning this lesson and learning, doing her Sharpay shit, but also learning some lessons in there. We have more time to explore that idea. And I think that would have been so cool because Obviously, Sharpay, especially of the time that she was created as a character, like, would have 100% suited an ABC Family teen drama at the very least, CW teen drama, whatever you want to call it. Like, it would have been so interesting to explore that, right? But unfortunately, it is what it is, and we got what we got. But I think these are some amazing ideas of how Sharpay's kind of lesson could have been done a little bit well. Because, like I said, the movie itself, we didn't see a reflection moment within Sharpay, really, or not a big one, right? Where she realizes she's in the wrong or she's facing the same exact things that she has put the people at East High through. So I just think these ideas would have been so much better to kind of illuminate the lessons Sharpay needed to learn. And I think the thing about a character like Sharpay is so often their lesson is not learned necessarily one time, right? That is something that like we see where like people learn the lesson, they go back. People learn the lesson, they go back. We see this happen a lot, right? Where it's like you seem like you were progressing, and then you take 5 steps back. Like that would have been something that I think would have been interesting to see from Sharpay and her storyline. But that is a wrap up of today. I feel like that's all I have to say about Sharpay. But there are so many ways that Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures could have been better. And that's a fine. And that's okay. And that's fine that Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures was what it was. Like I said, very mid movie, if you're like, do I need to rewatch it? Honestly, probably not. If you want to, throw it on in the background. Throw it on in the background. I don't think the music from this was particularly iconic by any means. Now, what I will say, and this is my last thing to say about Sharpay's Fabulous Adventures in the realm of the music, because I've already spoke about everything I could possibly think of so far. When I re-listened to New York's Best Kept Secret, I was like, surely, like, this to me sounds like the only like real musical song that like to me I'm like they didn't write this for the movie. This was like I don't know a copy of some what am I look a copy? What the hell? What's the word I'm looking for? Surely this was a cover in my eyes, okay? And I was like, wow, like I'm pretty impressed. Like, it's not like it's like the most amazing song you'll ever hear by any means, especially in like terms musical terms. But that was the only song I think on the Sharpie Fabulous Adventures soundtrack that I was like, I could see someone really singing this. But surprise, surprise, it was made for the movie, so that's pretty cool. But yeah, like the other ones, it's not like High School Musical where it's like these are iconic. Can you think of one off the top of your head from Sharpie Fabulous Adventures that you go, I need to listen to that for the rest of my life. I can't think of any song. You know what I mean? That's why I'm just like, if they had never made this, would I be missing it? No, not at all.